Imagine you're walking through the crowded streets of ancient Rome. The sun is hot, the stones of the Forum are shimmering, and the smell of olive oil, baked bread, and unwashed bodies drifts through the air. Merchants call out their prices, slaves hurry past with baskets of figs, and somewhere in the distance, you hear the roar of a crowd from the Colosseum. You might expect to find ordinary things for sale: grain, wine, honey, maybe even a trinket or two brought from Egypt. But tucked between the stalls of more respectable goods is something very different. Something a little sticky. A small vial. A stoppered flask of pale, glistening liquid. And the merchant selling it doesn't bother lowering his voice, because everyone knows exactly what it is. This, believe it or not, is gladiator sweat. Yes, sweat. The collected perspiration of half-naked, blooded fighters dragged straight out of the arena. You might wrinkle your nose at the thought, but in Rome, it was a luxury item. People actually paid for this. They didn't just buy it as a joke, either. They wanted it. They prized it. And for reasons that might make you gag just a little, Romans thought of it as exotic, erotic, and even healing. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. In the Roman imagination, gladiators weren't just men. They were living symbols of violence, masculinity, sexuality, and power. And in a society obsessed with rank and purity, gladiators occupied a strange position. On one hand, they were considered scum, criminals, slaves, foreigners, men who fought to the death for entertainment. On the other hand, they were celebrities. Worshipped, lusted after, even envied. A gladiator could be jeered in the morning and worshipped by wealthy women in the evening. And this celebrity worship went far beyond autographs. In fact, Romans didn't care about gladiator merchandise the way we do today. They weren't buying action figures or posters. They wanted the man himself, or at least the essence of him. His sweat, his blood, his oil. Bodily fluids weren't seen as gross, they were seen as carriers of life force. When a gladiator oiled himself before a fight, scraping off dirt and sweat afterward with a curved tool called a strigil, that sticky residue was collected. And instead of being thrown away, it was bottled. Merchants would actually advertise it. Imagine, fresh gladiator essence. Straight from the arena. Only the bravest, sweatiest fighters. And people lined up to buy it. To us, this sounds insane. We spray perfume, we rub on deodorant, we try our best to get rid of the smell of sweat. But in the Roman world, sweat meant something very different. It was proof of exertion. Proof of strength. Proof that a man had put his body on the line and survived. And Romans believed some of that strength could be transferred. Women, in particular, were drawn to it. A small dab of gladiator sweat could be mixed with perfume, spread across the cheeks as rouge, or even dabbed discreetly onto the lips. Some Roman writers claim it was used as an aphrodisiac. Others say it was swallowed, mixed into wine. If you're cringing right now, good, you should be. The Romans were cringing too. Plenty of authors mocked the practice as disgusting and shameful. But still, people bought it. And here's the strangest part, this wasn't some underground, secret kink. This was mainstream enough that writers joked about it openly. The satirist Juvenal made fun of upper-class women who pined after sweaty gladiators, hinting that they weren't just buying their fluids, they were buying something more personal, too. Pliny the Elder, the famous Roman natural historian, noted that gladiator sweat was prized as a beauty product. And physicians, those same men who bled their patients and prescribed pigeon dung for coughs, sometimes recommended it as medicine. In other words, gladiator sweat wasn't a bizarre rumor whispered in corners. It was a documented, accepted part of Roman culture. But step back into our little marketplace scene. Imagine a wealthy Roman matron, her hair styled in towering curls, pearls gleaming at her ears. She pretends to examine a bolt of silk, but her eyes keep darting to the stall just across the way. There, a slave holds up a small, stoppered vial. The liquid inside shimmers faintly in the sunlight. The matron coughs, adjusts her shawl, and whispers to her maid. The maid hurries forward, coins in hand, and a moment later, the bottle is hers. The woman doesn't drink it right away. No, she'll wait until she's home. She'll add a drop of it to her cosmetics. Maybe she'll dab a little on her wrists. Maybe she'll tuck it away, saving it for a special night when she wants to feel close to the heroic figure she saw in the arena. Or maybe, though she'd never admit it, she'll just open the vial when no one is looking, and breathe it in. Because in her mind, it's not just sweat. It's courage. It's virility. It's the essence of a man who risked his life for glory. Of course, not everyone was convinced. Imagine the disgust of a Roman philosopher, one of those stern old men who frowned at everything popular. He walks past the stall, sees the bottle of sweat, and nearly gags. "How low has Rome sunk?" he mutters. "Our ancestors conquered the world, and now our women are buying this." To him, it was a sign of moral decay, proof that Rome had grown decadent and foolish. But the stall stays open. The coins keep changing hands. And the market continues to thrive. This is the part of Roman history that makes us shake our heads and laugh. We imagine ourselves as sophisticated, modern, beyond superstition. But it's worth remembering that celebrity worship never really went away. Fans today buy Elvis's hair, Marilyn Monroe's dresses, even jars of so-called celebrity bathwater. And honestly, is that really so different from buying gladiator sweat? The Romans, it turns out, weren't so alien after all. They just happened to bottle their obsessions in a slightly smellier way. So, as you leave the marketplace behind, imagine one last time the sight of those tiny vials lined up on the merchant stall. Each one glistening, each one promising something absurd and alluring. Because to the Romans, sweat wasn't waste. It was treasure. And in the next section, we'll explore why they thought it wasn't just strange perfume, but powerful, erotic medicine. Let's return to the Roman world for a moment. You're no longer in the bustling marketplace now. Instead, imagine a quiet Roman villa. Marble columns, polished floors, the faint sound of a fountain dripping in the courtyard. A wealthy woman sits at her dressing table, a bronze mirror angled toward her face. Servants bustle quietly, holding trays of cosmetics, perfumes, and jewelry. But among the vials of rosewater and crushed iris root sits one container that looks out of place. Its contents shimmer faintly, golden in the lamplight. It is not perfume. It is not oil. It is gladiator sweat. She uncorks the vial carefully. The smell is sharp, earthy, even sour. But she doesn't recoil. She dabs it gently onto her cheek with a fingertip, blending it into her rouge. To her, this is not filth. It is desire. Because in the Roman imagination, this strange substance was far more than a cosmetic. It was an aphrodisiac. Now, before you laugh too hard, think about the logic. Gladiators were the superstars of Roman society, the very embodiment of virility. They risked their lives in the arena, fought bare-chested under the sun, muscles gleaming with oil and blood. For many Roman women, they were the ultimate fantasy, strong, dangerous, untouchable. Owning a piece of them, even in the form of sweat, meant capturing some of that forbidden allure. And Roman writers noticed. Pliny the Elder, the encyclopedic naturalist who wrote down everything from volcanoes to medicinal herbs, recorded that gladiator sweat was collected and sold specifically for its supposed powers as an aphrodisiac. To the Romans, sweat wasn't just a bodily byproduct. It was the liquid essence of masculinity, vitality, and lust. Some women wore it on their faces. Some added it to perfume. Others drank it, mixed with oil or wine. Yes, you heard that right, they actually ingested it. Imagine that, sipping gladiator sweat at a dinner party like some kind of bizarre health tonic. Why would anyone do this? To understand, we need to look at Roman ideas about the body. Romans believed that bodily fluids carried the very qualities of the person they came from. Blood contained courage. Milk contained nourishment. Sweat contained vitality and passion. To absorb those fluids was, in their eyes, to absorb the qualities themselves. This wasn't unique to sweat. Roman physicians sometimes recommended drinking the blood of a gladiator as a cure for epilepsy. To them, it made sense. The fighter's strength and vitality could cancel out the disorder in the patient's body. Horrifying, yes, but logical within their framework of belief. And if blood could heal, why not sweat? There's also the erotic element. Gladiators, for all their low social standing, had a sexual magnetism that Roman writers never stopped mocking. Satirists like Juvenal wrote cruel verses about wealthy women abandoning respectable men for sweaty gladiators. These women weren't just seeking entertainment, they were seeking raw, dangerous passion. To possess gladiator sweat was to have, in a sense, an intimate piece of the man himself. Think of it as the ancient Roman version of celebrity memorabilia. Except instead of buying a lock of Elvis's hair or a pop star's used shirt, you're smearing their body fluids on your face in hopes of becoming irresistible. And it wasn't just rumor. Archaeological evidence backs this up. Strigils, the curved scrapers used by athletes and gladiators to clean oil and sweat from their skin, have been found in abundance, often alongside jars that likely held the residue. Roman baths themselves were designed for collecting this oily mixture, and it wasn't unusual for the byproduct to be sold afterward. For athletes, this gladiator oil was already thought to have health benefits. For gladiators, it carried an erotic charge as well. Now picture the scene again. A Roman matron sits at her mirror, carefully blending a touch of gladiator sweat into her makeup. Her cheeks glow a little rosier. She glances at her reflection, smiling faintly. Perhaps she believes she looks more radiant. Perhaps she simply enjoys the thrill of owning something so intimate, so forbidden. And perhaps, if Pliny is to be believed, she expects her husband or lover to notice something different tonight. Because in Rome, gladiator sweat was whispered about not only as a cosmetic but as a love charm. Something that could make a woman irresistible, inflame passion, stir desire. Of course, not everyone approved. Moralists and philosophers mocked the practice mercilessly. To them, it was a sign that Rome had fallen into decadence, that women had lost all sense of modesty. What could be more shameful than painting your face with a fighter's sweat? And yet, their very disgust confirms the popularity of the custom. After all, if no one was doing it, why complain about it? And here's the uncomfortable truth: it probably worked, not because of magic, but because of psychology. To wear gladiator sweat was to carry a secret, a private thrill. The very act of believing it made you more desirable could boost confidence, change body language, make a person appear more alluring. The placebo effect was alive and well, long before modern medicine. But let's not pretend it was all perfume and romance. Sometimes, the obsession with gladiator fluids veered into darker territory. There are accounts of women smuggling sweat-stained cloths home from the arena. Of men who tried to sell diluted versions of the liquid, passing it off as authentic. The line between love potion and scam was always thin. And, given the lack of refrigeration, you can imagine that a vial of sweat sitting in the Roman sun for a few days might not have smelled enchanting. Still, the trade continued. Wealthy buyers kept purchasing it, sellers kept bottling it, and physicians kept prescribing it. Because to the Romans, sweat was never just sweat. It was heat, passion, and life itself, distilled into liquid form. And in that belief, we see both the absurdity and the humanity of the past. Absurd, because who in their right mind would dab gladiator sweat on their cheeks before dinner? But human, because aren't we still doing versions of the same thing? We chase after the essence of celebrities, hoping a piece of their magic will rub off on us. Maybe it's a perfume line with their name on it. Maybe it's a jersey worn in a game. Or maybe it's, if you're very, very unlucky, a jar of so-called celebrity bathwater being sold online. Sound familiar? The Romans weren't so strange after all. They just bottled their obsessions in a way we'd rather not imagine. And that brings us to the next question. How exactly was all this sweat collected and sold? Who scraped it, bottled it, and set the price? And how much was a vial of gladiator essence really worth? That's the story we'll explore in the next section, where the bizarre turns into cold, hard commerce. So far, we've wandered through the Roman marketplace and peered into the boudoirs of wealthy women, watching them dab a little gladiator sweat like rouge. But now comes the practical question. How exactly did that sweat get from the arena to the perfume table? Because it didn't just magically appear in tiny vials. No, someone had to collect it. And this is where Roman ingenuity, or Roman shamelessness, really comes to life. Scraping the bodies the Roman method was simple, and it started with a tool called the strigil. Picture it, a curved piece of bronze, shaped like a half-moon. Every athlete in Rome used one. After exercise or a fight, oil would be rubbed on the body to loosen dirt and protect the skin. Then, once they were glistening, the strigil was dragged firmly across the flesh, scraping away sweat, oil, dust, and blood in one sticky mixture. Normally, this was a cleaning ritual, done in the baths. But in the case of gladiators, the leftovers were precious. Slaves and attendants didn't discard it. Instead, they carefully collected the residue in jars. Imagine a servant with a little bronze pan, standing at the edge of the arena, scraping down a bruised fighter who was still breathing heavily from the match. Every drop of sweat, every smear of oil, every trace of blood was saved. It wasn't thrown away. It was treasure. Bottling the essence once scraped, the liquid, known as gladiator oil or strigmentum, was transferred into small ceramic or glass containers. Archaeologists have found elegant bottles from the Roman world designed for oils and perfumes. It's entirely possible that some once held gladiator essence, waiting for wealthy hands to claim them. And the market was thriving enough to draw attention. Martial, a Roman poet famous for his biting wit, wrote mocking verses about women who slathered themselves in gladiator sweat. His disgust wasn't aimed at the sellers. After all, someone had to make a living, but at the buyers who thought smearing a fighter's fluids made them glamorous. Commerce in sweat now, you may be wondering, how much did it cost? Unfortunately, exact price tags haven't survived. But we know that gladiators themselves were expensive commodities. Sponsoring games, training fighters, and even hiring a gladiator for a private party cost vast sums of money. Anything associated with gladiators carried prestige, and prestige had a price. We also know that cosmetics in Rome could be astonishingly costly. Imported perfumes from Arabia or India, made from myrrh and cinnamon, were priced high enough that only the elite could afford them. Gladiator sweat likely belonged to the same category, a luxury item for the wealthy, not a cheap trinket for the poor. In other words, not every Roman was smearing sweat on their face. It was a status symbol. The kind of thing a senator's wife might purchase as a daring indulgence, or a courtesan might wear to captivate her patrons. Street merchants and scams, of course. Wherever there's demand, there's fraud. The Roman satirists gleefully joked about con men selling diluted sweat, or worse, entirely fake mixtures. Picture this: a shady merchant sets up shop near the Colosseum, holding up a bottle of yellowish liquid. He swears it came from the most famous gladiator of the season, straight after a glorious victory. In reality, it might be goat fat mixed with olive oil and a splash of wine. But how would a buyer know the difference? This opened the door for ridicule. To Roman moralists, women who bought gladiator sweat weren't just decadent, they were gullible. They were paying good money for the dirtiest scam in town. Sweat and blood together, it wasn't just sweat, either. Gladiator blood was another product, harvested in the same way. Believed to cure epilepsy and other ailments, blood was collected when a fighter died in the arena. Doctors might recommend it as medicine, while ordinary people might smear it on themselves or sip it in wine. This made the whole enterprise even stranger. You could walk through a Roman market and find one stall selling figs, another selling bread, and a third offering, quite seriously, a choice between sweat and blood. Today, we would call that a horror show. To the Romans, it was an everyday shopping option. The social theater of sweat, but there's something deeper here than just bizarre commerce. Sweat, blood, and oil weren't just physical fluids. They were symbolic. To own them was to own a piece of glory. Gladiators fought at the edge of death, under the gaze of thousands. To capture their sweat was to capture that moment, the danger, the thrill, the spectacle. It was bottled adrenaline, distilled fame, liquid lust. And that, more than anything else, was what buyers wanted. Not the smell, not the texture, but the story. The essence of someone who had risked everything for the roar of the crowd. A day in the life of a sweat seller. Imagine being one of these merchants for a moment. You don't raise crops. You don't make pottery. You don't weave cloth. You collect sweat. Your entire livelihood depends on scraping half-naked men after fights and bottling what you find. Your customers? Respectable matrons in fine stoli. Wealthy courtesans. Maybe even senators themselves, buying discreetly for a lover. You hand over a vial, coins change hands, and you move on. It's grotesque, but it's also oddly modern. Because isn't that what celebrity merchandise still is? A transaction based not on the item itself, but on the aura of the person it's tied to? The economics of desire, and in this way, gladiator sweat was no different from silk or spice. It was a luxury trade, a symbol of decadence, and a marker of status. To buy it was to signal that you were wealthy enough, daring enough, and fashionable enough to indulge in Rome's strangest luxury. It was commerce meeting obsession, money meeting lust. And it worked, for centuries. So now we've seen how sweat was scraped, bottled, sold, and sometimes faked. But this raises a larger question. Why did this make sense to Romans at all? Why did they truly believe fluids like sweat or blood could carry strength, beauty, or passion? That's what we'll explore next. The Roman worldview of the body, health, and superstition, and how it made even the strangest products seem perfectly logical. Up until now, you've probably been thinking, alright, Romans were gross, end of story. But the truth is, this obsession with sweat didn't come out of nowhere. It wasn't some random fad, like TikTok dances or celebrity bathwater. It actually made sense, at least within the logic of the Roman world. So let's step back for a moment and ask, why did Romans think this was a good idea? The Roman body and its fluids. For Romans, the body was a system of fluids. Ancient medicine, borrowed from the Greeks, was built on the theory of the four humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health meant keeping these in balance. Illness meant they were out of balance. But beyond those four, there was a broader cultural belief: bodily fluids carried essence. Sweat wasn't just water dripping from the skin. It was a concentrated distillation of life force. Blood was courage, milk was nourishment, semen was fertility. And sweat was energy, heat, vitality. So when someone as powerful and admired as a gladiator produced sweat, it wasn't just gross moisture. It was a bottled spark of the qualities that made him desirable. The magic of transference. This belief wasn't unique to Rome. It runs through human history. People across cultures have always imagined that the qualities of a person could be transferred through touch, through objects, through fluids. Romans believed that drinking a gladiator's blood could cure epilepsy. The logic was simple: a strong man's essence could correct a weak body's failings. They also thought that eating the liver of certain animals could transfer strength or courage. And gladiator sweat? That was a subtler, more sensual form of the same logic. It was erotic, yes, but also medicinal. Doctors might prescribe it as a cure for nervousness or infertility. Lovers might use it as a way to heat desire. And women, especially, might dab it on their cheeks to absorb some of the strength and passion of the fighter they adored. The paradox of gladiators. But here's the fascinating twist: gladiators weren't respected men. They were slaves, criminals, outsiders. In polite society, they ranked just above executioners and gravediggers. And yet, Romans couldn't look away from them. They were despised and desired at the same time. Philosophers scorned them, but the public adored them. This paradox made them perfect objects of obsession. Owning a vial of gladiator sweat wasn't just about beauty, it was about living dangerously. It was about flirting with shame. In other words, wearing gladiator sweat was scandalous and fashionable, like sneaking into a forbidden club. It gave women a way to rebel within the tight restrictions of Roman society, while still staying within the bounds of wealth and privilege. Beauty, the Roman way. To understand further, we have to look at Roman beauty standards. Cosmetics were everywhere. Women painted their cheeks with crushed minerals, whitened their faces with lead-based creams, yes, actual lead, and dyed their hair with concoctions that could strip paint off a wall. Some even used crocodile dung in facial masks. Against this backdrop, is gladiator sweat really the weirdest thing? Maybe not. It was one more exotic ingredient in a long line of dangerous, strange, or downright deadly cosmetics. What mattered wasn't the smell or texture, it was the effect. If people believed it worked, then it did. Religion, magic, and the body. There's also a spiritual layer. Romans lived in a world thick with superstition. Amulets, charms, and spells were woven into daily life. People wore phallic pendants for protection, inscribed curses on lead tablets, and prayed to household gods for health. Sweat fit into this magical worldview. A gladiator's sweat wasn't just bodily fluid, it was infused with divine energy. After all, these men fought on the edge of death, in arenas dedicated to Mars, the god of war. Their bodies were vessels of violence and survival. To capture their sweat was to capture something sacred. Comparison to other fluids and gladiator sweat was hardly alone in this fascination. Let's list just a few examples. Blood, used to heal epilepsy. Believed to carry courage. Sometimes even drunk fresh. Urine, collected from public toilets and used as a cleaning agent, especially for whitening clothes. Romans taxed it because it was so valuable. Spit, believed to ward off evil spirits when applied in rituals. Breast milk, considered a cure for certain illnesses, often used in medicinal recipes. Saliva mixed with ashes, applied as a treatment for wounds. Against this backdrop, gladiator sweat starts to feel less bizarre, just another entry in the catalogue of Roman body fluid magic. Criticism from the respectable: not everyone was convinced. Philosophers like Seneca and Pliny scoffed at these practices. To them, it was proof that Rome was rotting from the inside, drowning in decadence. But here's the thing, their disgust shows us how popular it really was. If no one was smearing gladiator sweat, why complain about it? The fact that elite men wrote angry lines about women buying it means the practice was visible, widespread, and socially significant. It also reflects an ancient gender divide. Women, often excluded from politics and public power, found ways to exert influence through beauty, charm, and desire. If that meant dabbing sweat on their faces, then so be it. Men mocked them, but the jars kept selling. A strange mirror, and perhaps this is where the story turns back to us. Because before we laugh too hard at the Romans, we should admit that the logic isn't so alien. We buy celebrity perfumes today, not because they smell different, but because they carry the aura of the star attached to them. People bid thousands for a lock of Marilyn Monroe's hair or Michael Jackson's glove. Some even pay money for so-called celebrity bathwater. So maybe gladiator sweat isn't just a bizarre Roman oddity. Maybe it's the oldest version of a very modern obsession, the dream that we can bottle fame, buy desire, and wear power on our skin. So yes, it made sense to the Romans. Perfect sense, in fact. Their medicine, their magic, their beauty standards, and their obsessions all aligned to make gladiator sweat not just acceptable, but desirable. And that leads us to the final question. What happened to this practice? Did it fade away when the gladiators disappeared, or does it still echo in strange ways today? That's the story for our last section. So here we are at the end of this strange Roman ritual. We've followed the story from the roar of the Colosseum, to the scraping of sweaty gladiator bodies, to the marketplace stalls where their essence was bottled and sold. We've seen Roman matrons dabbing sweat on their cheeks, philosophers gagging in disgust, and merchants growing rich off the strangest product line in history. But now the question remains, what happened to this bizarre custom? Did it disappear with the gladiators, or did it live on in other forms? When the games ended, gladiators themselves faded away in the later centuries of Rome. By the 5th century AD, the arenas were largely silent. Christianity, with its growing moral influence, condemned the blood sports as cruel and sinful. The Colosseum became a ruin, its seats empty, its sands no longer stained with blood and sweat. And when the gladiators vanished, so did the literal market for their fluids. No more jars of strigmentum lined the stalls, no more whispered purchases of sweaty aphrodisiacs. But the underlying idea that you could capture power, beauty, or desire in a bottle didn't vanish at all. It simply evolved. Saints, relics, and holy power consider the rise of Christianity. The faithful began collecting relics of saints, bones, hair, even drops of blood. These weren't sold as aphrodisiacs, of course, but the logic was the same. People believed that the essence of holiness could linger in the physical remains of a person, just as Romans had believed vitality clung to sweat. Pilgrims traveled across Europe to touch relics, to drink water that had passed over bones, to pray before fragments of cloth said to have belonged to martyrs. In many ways, gladiator sweat was replaced by the sacred sweat of saints. The desire to bottle essence never truly went away, it just became holier. Medieval obsessions in the Middle Ages, other bizarre practices emerged. Alchemists sold powder of sympathy, made from dried blood. Physicians prescribed potions with crushed mummies, imported from Egypt, believing the dead still carried medicinal power. Wealthy buyers sought out unicorn horns, actually narwhal tusks, as cures for poison. All of it built on the same Roman logic. If you consume the essence of something powerful, you gain its qualities. The modern echo, and here we arrive at the present. You may think we've grown beyond all that. After all, no one today is selling vials of Gladiator sweat at the farmer's market. But look closer. Celebrity culture runs on the same principle. We buy perfumes branded with famous names, not because they smell radically different, but because they claim to bottle the aura of the star. Fans pay thousands for Elvis Presley's hair, Marilyn Monroe's lipstick, or a pop star's half-finished drink. And yes, even in our own time, there are infamous cases of influencers selling bathwater to eager fans. Does that sound so different from Roman women buying Gladiator sweat? Perhaps the Romans would laugh at how little we've changed. What the Romans teach us, so what do we take away from this? Beyond the disgust and the humor, there's a strangely human truth. People have always wanted shortcuts to power, beauty, and desire. We've always hoped that by holding onto a piece of someone admired, or feared, we could capture a spark of what makes them special. For the Romans, that spark came in the form of sweat scraped off a gladiator's back. For us, it comes in perfumes, merchandise, autographs, and celebrity relics. Different bottles, same desire. A closing image, so picture it one last time. The Colosseum at dusk, the crowd dispersing, the sand still sticky with the aftermath of battle. A servant leans down with a strigil, scraping oil and sweat into a waiting jar. He corks it carefully, knowing it will fetch a good price tomorrow. Somewhere across the city, a woman waits. She'll hold that jar in her hands, whispering promises into the night. To her, it is more than sweat. It is love, lust, magic, medicine, all bottled in a single shimmering drop. And while we might laugh, maybe we should admit something quietly to ourselves. The Romans weren't so strange after all. They just wore their obsessions more openly. Because at the end of the day, humans have always tried to buy the essence of the people they admire. The only difference is that, thankfully, most of us no longer have to dab it straight from a gladiator's armpit.